Chapter 341. Kelvin hung up the phone and reported to Ethan, "Mr. Miller, Toxic Hive was able to locate the island Mrs. Miller was on. Mr. Carlton thought we were the ones that gave him the information. Mrs. Miller is with him now. Should we go pick her up?" "No need. It takes time to test the bone marrow. I want to verify something." Kelvin didn't know what Ethan was trying to verify, but he guessed it was important because Ethan set Olivia aside when Olivia was usually the first thing on his mind. Ethan was in a bad state. Kelvin could see the sweat on his head, and the hands on the steering wheel were trembling. Kelvin wondered who Dr. Cohen was. She was able to get such a huge reaction out of Ethan. Was it an old flame of Ethan's? Ethan was acting too irregularly tonight. He had been driving very recklessly. Even Kelvin had to grab hold of the handle to stay in place. The car got back to the urban area after a short while. Kelvin quickly thought about the places Ethan might go, but he didn't expect Ethan to go to the cemetery. It was in the middle of the night. Was he going to visit his mother's grave? The rain was pouring down heavily. There was also thunder and lightning in the sky. Kelvin could see the gravestones as they drove by. Even a battle-hardened man like him felt a little creeped out. Ethan stopped the car at the side of a path. Kelvin quickly got out of the car with an umbrella to try and shield Ethan from the rain. Ethan didn't bother with the umbrella. He looked like he was entirely in a trance. He stumbled his way up the hill. The soil had been soaked by the rain and turned loose. Every step Ethan took created a puddle of mud. It was slippery and dirty. Ethan walked quickly. His heavy boots stepped on the puddles, causing water to splash around. There were only a few dim lights on the hill. They shone on the gravestones, making them seem eerie. The wind rustled the surrounding branches, which made a rustling sound. There was no one else around besides them. Ethan could only hear the sound of his footsteps and his heartbeat. He was like a beast out of control, rushing forward with reckless disregard. He finally stopped before a grave. The plum blossoms around the grave had withered, and only the branches were left dancing in the wind. The faint street lamp shone on the picture on the gravestone. Ethan slowly crouched down and ran his fingers over the picture. Kelvin was confused when he saw Ethan crouched before Leia's grave. He thought Ethan wanted to verify something. He didn't know why Ethan came to Leia's grave. "Mr. Miller, the gravestone is newly made. It isn't even leaking in heavy rain like this. It's pretty well made." Kelvin tried his hardest to think of what Ethan could be trying to check. Leia's grave was destroyed by Olivia and later fixed. He didn't understand why Ethan would come to check on the grave at this hour. Even though Ethan was already soaked, Kelvin was holding the umbrella above him. "Mr. Miller, the rain is too heavy, and Mrs. Miller is with Mr. Carlton. Why don't we head back?" Lowering his head, Ethan said slowly, "Open up the grave." Kelvin said out of habit, "Yes, sir." He paused for 2 seconds, then asked, "What did you say?" Kelvin's heart was beating very fast. He was sure he had misheard Ethan. A lightning bolt lit up the sky, revealing Ethan's cold expression. He tightly grasped the gravestone's edges with his fingers as he said in a slow and heavy tone, "I said, open up the grave and dig up the coffin." Chapter 342. Kelvin's knees became weak, and his voice sounded uneasy. "About that, Mr. Miller, I'm a materialist, but I still think that we should let the deceased rest in peace. It's the middle of the night. We shouldn't disturb Miss Miller's rest. What if she gets angry and comes out of her coffin?" Ethan wasn't in the mood for nonsense. Kelvin wasn't as sharp as Brent. "Get some people here. I want this grave opened and the coffin dug up," Ethan ordered. "Understood." Kelvin has done many good and bad things in his life, but he had never done something so immoral. As he dug up the grave, he muttered, "Don't hate me for this, Miss Miller. I'm just the one taking orders. If you have a complaint, please take it up with your brother. He's the one responsible for this. And he's not afraid of ghosts." Ethan didn't idle around. He was the one who dug the fastest. He ignored Kelvin's suggestion to stay out of the rain. He even started kneeling on the ground, moving away the dirt with his hands to prevent damaging the coffin. This was the first time Kelvin saw Ethan in such a sorry state. He felt sorry for him but still didn't know what Ethan was trying to do. Calvin saw Ethan's conflicted expression after the coffin was unearthed entirely. Ethan looked fearful, but there was also some hope in his eyes. What was wrong with the body in the coffin? Ethan hesitated momentarily, then said firmly, "Open it." "All right. Stand back, Mr. Miller." According to tradition, corpses were usually cremated, but Ethan was overcome with grief then. His sister suffered inhumane treatment in life. He didn't want to hurt her again, so he had her body preserved. It had been 2 years. The body should have almost completely decomposed. Even if they opened the coffin now, they would only see some bones. Calvin was still wondering what Ethan was trying to accomplish. When the coffin was opened, the thunder roared. Calvin's hands holding the shovel were shaking. Ethan barked, "Open it." The nailed coffin lid was opened. As expected, all that was within was a skeleton wrapped in burial clothes and some items that were buried with the body. Calvin asked, "Mr. Miller, the coffin is opened. What's next?" "Take some bones and perform a paternity test." Realization struck Calvin. "Mr. Miller, are you suspecting that the body here isn't your sister's?" Ethan didn't reply but urged him, saying, "Take them back to the military hospital and get them tested. Bring the bones over personally. Don't let them get into the hands of anyone else. I want to know the results as soon as possible." "Understood." Calvin dared not make any more jokes. He had a serious expression on his face. The heavy rain soaked Ethan completely as the cold winds blew on him. But he didn't feel cold at all. He looked like a decrepit old man as he slowly returned to the car. He didn't head over to Chris' place even though he knew Olivia was with him. He went home and took a shower. Then, he sat on the couch without saying a word. The lights were bright in the Miller residence. They stayed on for the entire night. Brent entered the room at the break of dawn. He looked at Ethan, who looked like he was frozen in place, and wondered if he had been sitting on the couch the entire night. The terrace door wasn't shut, and the white curtains danced freely in the breeze. Raindrops flew in through the door, falling on the thick carpet. Ethan didn't even move when Brent entered the room. He only stared blankly at something. The living room was completely silent. Brent changed into his indoor shoes and walked in quietly. He went to shut the terrace door to stop the rain from getting in. "Mr. Miller, we've cleared out Toxic Hive's base. They moved most of the drugs, but we've sent some of the remaining ones for testing. We've captured 3 people. There were 7 casualties. The organization's core members got away but left in a hurry, so they didn't have time to destroy the data. I've sent experts over to extract the data. We're sure to learn a lot from it." Ethan's eyes finally moved, and he said in a strained voice, "Okay. I can't seem to get through to Kelvin's phone. Is he out on a mission?" Brent asked tentatively. Brent noticed that Ethan's voice was very hoarse. He quickly poured him a glass of water and said, "Here, have some water first." The door opened, and Kelvin walked in anxiously. "Mr. Miller, the results are out." Chapter 343. Ethan took a sip of the water and set it aside. He didn't set the glass down properly, causing it to fall on the floor. The glass fell on the carpet, but it didn't break. The carpet absorbed the water from the glass. Brent looked at the wet carpet, finding it weird that Ethan would make such a careless mistake. Ethan stood up immediately, his face filled with urgency. Brent wondered what Kelvin could have brought back to cause Ethan to be so agitated. Kelvin came in through the rain. Several raindrops had fallen on the paper bag he was holding in his arms. He quickly handed the paper bag to Ethan with his rain-soaked arms. He was running when he came in. Water was dripping from his head, and he was still panting. "Mr. Miller, I was with the sample all the way, from the extraction of the sample to the testing and the generation of the results. I had my eyes on it the whole time. Don't worry, no one else got their hands on it. The results this time are completely authentic." Ethan took the paper bag in his hands. He was so anxious, but he suddenly dared not open the bag. Brent saw the hesitation in his eyes. "Mr. Miller, why don't I look at it for you?" Ethan opened his eyes and took a deep breath. His gaze became determined. "No need." His fingers held the white string on the paper bag and unraveled it. Brent could see Ethan's hands trembling. The trembling was very severe. The paper bag was opened, and Ethan took the report out. His expression became complicated when he saw the report. There was excitement, happiness, and sorrow. One moment, he was smiling. The next moment, he sat on the couch, clutching his head with guilt. Brent's curiosity was piqued. He glanced at the report and saw the results. The DNA samples were highly mismatched, and there wasn't a biological link. This, Brent said softly. Even Kelvin understood what was going on. We've been tricked. The body we fished from the sea 2 years ago wasn't Miss Miller's. Brent denied it firmly. That's impossible. We did a test to verify it. How could it go wrong? Mr. Miller doesn't have any other family members. Brent, this paternity report was done with the DNA from that same body. As you can see, they aren't related by blood. That report back then was forged. Brent was stunned. Who did that body belong to if not Miss Miller's? She was Jody. That was all she ever was. But we hadn't seen Miss Miller for so long, and we mistook her for Miss Miller. Her face somewhat resembled Miss Miller's face as a child, and coupled with the forged DNA report, we were misled to think she was Miss Miller. Kelvin thought for a while and added, maybe her face was even altered beforehand so we would find it believable. Brent was deeply shaken, and his heart kept beating heavily. Kelvin looked at the despondent Ethan. There is good and bad news. The good news is that Miss Miller is alive and has been taking care of Mr. Miller by his side all these years. The bad news is that Mr. Miller thought she was dead and took out his anger on Mrs. Miller and the Fordhams. Ethan finally understood that Leah was the one behind everything. He became emotionally unstable after learning of her death. The forged evidence was enough for him to pin everything on Jeff. It was like he was in a trance back then. Whenever he saw Olivia's lively and joyful smile, he thought of his dead sister and would have the urge to hurt her. He realized that the things he had done to Olivia were unforgivable. He had hurt the woman he loved the most with his own hands. He had the answers to everything now. There was only one question. Why would Miss Miller do all those things to Mrs. Miller? Did they have any grudges? Why would she spend so many resources to create such a massive deception? Chapter 344. Brent sighed. I don't know what's going through Miss Miller's head. But I wonder how Mrs. Miller will react after learning the truth. Yeah, Mrs. Miller doesn't know anything. She just thinks that Mr. Miller became distant because of Miss Carlton. She tried so hard to get back with Mr. Miller for 2 years. She even tried to take her own life in exchange for Miss Miller's. If she learns the truth now, who will she blame for the misfortune that befell the Fordhams? There was the downfall of the Fordham family and her father's traffic accident. She went through a lot as well. Learning the truth would be like cutting into an old wound. It would reveal the bloody and ugly past. If he had known the truth would be so devastating, would Ethan have insisted on searching for it? The Fordham family was just unlucky from the beginning. They suffered Ethan's wrath for no reason. Olivia tried to repair their relationship for 2 years, but they still went their separate ways. Finally, he chose to set aside his hatred. He wanted to rebuild trust and fix his relationship with her, but then, the truth surfaced. She'll never find out, Ethan said in a hoarse voice. Brent and Kelvin looked at him simultaneously as he slowly raised his head. Ethan's typically neat hair was tousled. A few strands of hair were hanging down, covering a part of his forehead. Though he appeared less intimidating, his eyes had a resolute gleam. As long as you both keep this secret, she'll never find out. Kelvin swallowed and scratched his head. Mr. Miller, I've never gone out with a woman before, but I know women hate lies and secrets. I think you should come clean with Mrs. Miller on this. It's too big of a matter to hide from her. You should come clean and ask for forgiveness. You can't hide this from her forever. Once she finds out the truth and learns that you've been lying to her, you'll completely lose the chance to get her back. Be that as it may, this matter concerns her father, who's still missing. If she learns the truth, will she forgive Mr. Miller? If they sever all ties now, there wouldn't even be a future to speak of. Ethan was feeling conflicted. He knew he should come clean. But he was afraid of losing Olivia if he told her the truth. He didn't know what to do. Kelvin said earnestly, Mr. Miller, you should find a chance to come clean with her. Olivia was left alone in the villa. She sighed in relief when she heard from Chris that Ethan was fine. She even cooperated with Chris and ate her fill while waiting for the test results. The sound of the rain made her annoyed and kept her up. She lay on the soft and spacious bed while her mind was thinking of the woman in the doctor's coat. Although she covered herself up thoroughly, her eyes were visible. Those eyes looked a lot like Ethan's eyes, especially when she was angry. Olivia had brought up Leia before the woman, but she avoided the topic. There was something fishy about that. Olivia began to make bold deductions. Maybe she was wrong from the beginning. Jody and Leia were not the same person. Leia went missing when she was a child. No one had seen her for more than a decade. She only needed to find a person who looked a little like her to be the sacrificial lamb. The relationship between Jody and Jeff could have been real, but it might have also been part of Leia's plan. She could have been the mastermind. She created a scenario where she was killed to intensify the conflict between Olivia and Ethan. When she recalled the syringe last night, a chill went down Olivia's spine, and her back was covered in sweat. What a terrifying woman Leia was. But Olivia didn't understand why Leia harbored such animosity toward her. Leia was kidnapped at a very young age, and they had never even met each other. But she suddenly remembered Colin's words, "Some people are just born evil." And then she thought about Leo. Many mysteries were haunting her, and she couldn't figure them out. Someone knocked on the door and came in after getting her approval. It was Chris. Chapter 345. Chris' words pulled Olivia back to reality. She remembered the most crucial task at hand. It was the bone marrow test results. She quickly got off the bed. Even though she didn't want to donate her bone marrow to Chloe, she no longer had a choice. So, she got ready to donate her bone marrow. Chris turned on the lights in the room. The sudden brightness caused Olivia to wince and cover her eyes with her hands. She noticed a sealed paper bag in Chris' hand after her eyes adjusted to the brightness. With a serious expression, Chris said, "Olivia, I need to talk to you." Olivia saw his serious expression. It reminded her of a strict, disciplinary teacher. She wasn't able to discern his intent right away. She wondered if her bone marrow was incompatible. "Okay," she said. Olivia sat down, and Chris sat right across from her. "Mr. Carlton, you have a weighty tone. Is my bone marrow not compatible?" Chris sighed deeply, pushed the paper bag before her, and said, "Take a look for yourself." Olivia didn't know what he meant by that. It felt like it wasn't just about the bone marrow compatibility. She wondered if he had found out about her cancer. But even so, he shouldn't have such an expression. Olivia opened the paper bag with reluctance. There were 2 reports in it. One was the bone marrow compatibility results. As expected, she wasn't a match for Chloe. She had gathered that fact from Chris' expression. She picked up the second report. It was a paternity test report. This, she was surprised by. She quickly skimmed through it and saw her and Chloe's names on it. The result was they weren't related. The news left her dumbstruck. She was so fixated on Leia that she never stopped to think if she was Chloe's biological daughter. The test results hit her like a ton of bricks. She was dumbfounded, and her head was in a daze. She said in disbelief, What's the meaning of this?" Chris hadn't slept the entire night. He had been fatigued, but now he looked frail. His only hope was dashed. He looked like he had aged several years overnight. He leaned back on the couch with a tired expression. "It's as the report states." Olivia looked at the report repeatedly. She looked at every word carefully to ensure her eyes weren't playing tricks on her. She still couldn't believe what she saw. "How can I not be my mother's daughter? Your bone marrow isn't a match for Chloe's. It's normal for a child's bone marrow to not match her mother's, but the doctor who did the test found it weird. He asked me to do a DNA test. It confirmed that you're not biologically related to Chloe." Even Chris was surprised by this result. He had been anticipating the results for so long. Olivia was the only hope he had for saving Chloe. But not only did the bone marrow not a match, Olivia wasn't even Chloe's biological daughter. For a moment, the 2 of them remained silent. Olivia took a long time to accept this fact. Over the years, she had always thought about her mother lovingly even though she never got to see Chloe much and even though Chloe was cold to her when she was a child. Now, She was informed that all of it had been a mistake. Could she start over? More than a decade of waiting had ended up as a joke. Olivia calmed her emotions and softly asked, "Can I see her?" Chapter 346. Chris looked at her defeatedly and said, "Okay, I'll arrange it. But she's frail right now. She can't talk for extended periods." "I'll take note of that, thanks." Chris sighed helplessly. "I have to apologize to you. I'm the one who forced you to come back. I also took your bone marrow for testing against your will." Olivia didn't have the heart to reprimand him when she saw his sickly face. "It's fine. Thank you for letting me know the truth. If not for the test, I'd still be in the dark. Mr. Carlton, since I'm not Miss Parker's biological daughter, you'll be able to save her when you find her child. Don't be too sad." "That's true. Let's go. I'll bring you to meet her. Let's find out what happened." Chris brought Olivia to the hospital. Olivia was still reeling from all the information she uncovered. Too many things happened abruptly. She didn't even have time to think about Leia. Since Chloe wasn't her mother, she wondered about Jeff. Was he her father, or was her father someone else? Did Jeff know about her origins? She tried to search her memories for anything suspicious when she was with him, but she came up empty. She looked at the rain outside the window. It reminded her of her emotions that were in a mess. After some time passed, they arrived at the hospital. Olivia quickly got out of the car. She almost tripped and fell. Chris gave her a hand. "Be careful." "Yes, thanks." Olivia thanked him calmly and followed him into the hospital. This was the first time Olivia was going to meet Chloe after she fell sick. She felt conflicted. She wondered if Chloe had already known she wasn't her biological daughter, and that was why she was so cold to her. If that was the case, Chloe owed her nothing. Olivia finally saw Chloe again after so long. She no longer looked like the elegant lady she was. She had lost a lot of weight. She was lying on the bed with her hair down. Her face was pale, and she looked lethargic. Chloe looked toward the door when she heard it open. Her eyes lit up when she saw Olivia. She struggled to sit up. Chris and Olivia rushed over to her and helped her up. "You don't have to get up. Just lie down." Chloe grabbed Olivia's hand. "Liv, you finally came to see me. I know I've let you down. It's all my fault." Olivia was stunned. She thought Chloe knew that they weren't related. Besides, she was already in a bad state. She didn't have to pretend if she didn't care about her. Chloe reached out to touch Olivia's face. "I'm sorry. It's my fault. I know you must have been so scared, but I said some terrible things to you." Olivia glanced at Chris, seemingly asking, "Does she not know?" Chris steadied Chloe and said, "Chloe, I have something to tell you, but you must promise me that you won't get worked up." Chloe took a look at Chris and Olivia's face. She noticed something was wrong. Is the bone marrow not a match? "Liv, I've already thought things through. Everything that happened was my fault. Now karma's coming back to bite me. I'll accept anything that happens to me. I'll be satisfied as long as I see you safe and sound." When she heard those words, Olivia felt like she had been stabbed in the chest. Why did Chloe have to come to her senses at this moment? She finally felt her mother's love for the first time, but something like this happened. "Why are you crying, Liv?" Chloe hugged her and said tearfully, "I've been thinking about the past. I know I haven't been a good mother. I've never given you enough attention. I don't have much time left. Give me a chance to love you like I should have done all those years ago." Chapter 347. Chloe hadn't picked up on Chris and Olivia's expressions. She was still immersed in her memories. "I remember that I never cared about your studies or your preferences. After leaving you for so many years, I didn't even call you once. You must have hated me for leaving you when you were so young, right?" Olivia sniffed, wondering if she should tell Chloe the truth. Chris hesitated for a while and sighed. "Chloe, you have to calm down. What I'm about to say is very important." Olivia wiped her tears and then helped Chloe wipe hers. Chloe was taken aback. Olivia had always been cold to her. This was the first time Olivia approached her. "What do you want to tell me?" Chris went straight to the point. "The bad news is that Olivia's bone marrow isn't compatible." "Yeah, I was prepared for that. The good news is that Olivia isn't your biological daughter. You have another daughter. Her bone marrow may be a match. The news was too sudden and direct. It was like a blow to Chloe's head, causing her to be dazed. What did you say? It seemed like the truth had been kept from Chloe as well. Chris didn't explain too much and handed her the evidence, saying, "Here, look at this." Chloe saw the DNA test results. Her face paled, and she shook her head. Impossible. How could this be? How could Olivia not be my daughter? Olivia tried to comfort her. Miss Parker, calm down. I had just found out too. I was as surprised as you were right now. This report is authentic. Something must have happened back then. Think back. You were pregnant, right? Chloe muttered. I may not have liked your father, but my pregnancy was real. At that time, I had severe morning sickness and kept vomiting for several months, which was quite tortuous. No wonder you never liked me, Olivia quipped. Chloe felt embarrassed and blushed. Try thinking about it. Did something out of the ordinary happen when you were pregnant? Like developmental issues with the baby? Or did any accidents on the day of delivery? During the pregnancy, I had intense morning sickness. However, the prenatal checkups showed that the baby was healthy. I found out the gender early, and it was a girl. I remember the day of delivery very clearly. I had checked into the hospital early. The doctor was by my side the whole time after my water broke. I went into labor for a day but couldn't deliver naturally, so it was changed to a C-section. They gave me partial anesthesia, so I was conscious. What happened next? Olivia asked. After that, I was rolled out of the operating room with the baby. Your father and grandmother had their focus on me because the birth injured my body, and I was in pain after the operation. The baby was handed over to a nanny. Chloe felt embarrassed as she recalled what happened. I suffered from depression back then. I had antenatal and postnatal depression. My condition got worse due to the C-section. It caused me to hate the baby. The nanny was the one who took care of the baby from birth. She fed the baby, took care of the dirty diapers, and bathed the baby. While recovering at the postnatal care center, I focused on getting better. I didn't care about the baby much. Olivia frowned. So after the baby was born, Dad and Grandma were focused on you, and no one was watching the baby. That's right. I was in immense pain, and the care center was costly too. We figured the people there would be more experienced, so we didn't pay much attention. Olivia placed her hand on her forehead in exasperation. She knew Jeff loved Chloe, but she didn't expect him to not care about the baby. Chloe's baby wasn't only the one in the care center. They were all newborns and probably looked the same. They could have brought the wrong baby home by accident. I thought you had already known that I wasn't your daughter, and that was why you were so indifferent. Her words air like a slap on Chloe's face. She didn't know if she should cry. She sobbed, but she didn't know what to say. Olivia looked at Chris and said, Mr. Carlton, this means you'll only have to track down the care center and look into the babies that were born at the same time as Miss Parker's baby. You'll be able to find her daughter. Chapter 348. Chris held Chloe's hand and comforted her, saying, Don't cry. I'll find your daughter. I'll leave you two alone. You must have a lot to talk about. Chloe and Olivia were the only ones left in the ward. They looked at each other in silence. They were still trying to come to terms with their current identities. Chloe was the first to break the silence. She held Olivia's hand and said, It doesn't matter even if we're not related by blood. I still need to make it up to you. This terminal disease must be my punishment. Miss Parker, you don't have to say that. You'll definitely find a compatible bone marrow. You must rest well. How is your dad? Olivia shook her head and said, He's still the same. The authorities kept the incident at Jeff's hospital a secret. The public did not know what happened. Even Olivia wasn't aware of the number of casualties. If your father wakes up, tell him I'm sorry. I've betrayed his love. He's a good man. He shouldn't have been put through these hardships. Oftentimes, people would only begin to appreciate the beauty of life after being placed in a hopeless situation. Olivia had waited for this moment for over a decade. However, at this moment, as she looked at Chloe on the hospital bed, she had truly let go of her grievances. Chloe had indeed been irresponsible, but she wasn't her birth mother. The biological bond between a parent and their child was unique. Perhaps Chloe was only cold to her because they weren't actually related. Chloe wasn't in good shape and couldn't talk much more. The reality was that their situation was very awkward. There wasn't much to say. Olivia left after talking a little bit more. Olivia stood at a crossroad, watching as cars drove by. She felt lost. She had a lot of things she needed to do, but she didn't know where to start. Chloe wasn't her mother, and Jeff probably wasn't her father as well. She wondered where her real family was. Did they not know about her after all these years? She was alone in Aldenvine, not knowing what to do. Her stomach rumbled. She sighed and collected her thoughts. She decided to plan her next step after getting breakfast. She began to walk to the nearest place with restaurants. The storm had died down significantly, and the clouds looked like they were dissipating. Olivia dialed Colin's number. She wanted to ask about Leo. Even if Jeff wasn't her biological father, he treated her very well and gave her all the love he could. Their relationship had long surpassed that of just blood relations. Olivia couldn't reach Colin's phone, which made her feel uneasy. The woman mentioned that Leo was going to seek revenge against Ethan. Why did Colin's phone also become unreachable? Olivia's finger hovered over Ethan's number, but she didn't make the call. She was only suspecting that his sister was alive. With his obsession with his sister, he would probably get mad before Olivia could finish saying what she wanted. She decided to get evidence before talking to him. Olivia went to a restaurant, had some pancakes, and drank milk. She left for the cemetery after she paid for her meal. Before she got out of the restaurant, someone ran into her. Olivia stepped back in fright. She thought the people who kidnapped her previously had come to get her. Upon taking a closer look, she saw a well-dressed man who had somehow ended up right before her. The man was face down on the ground. There was a valuable watch on his wrist. Olivia realized the man wasn't trying to scam her. Crouching down, she noticed the man had fainted. She saw no blood on the man, but his face was pale. Luckily, the hospital was nearby. Olivia brought the man to the hospital with the help of some passers-by. A nurse waved at Olivia, saying, "You're the patient's family member, right? You need to come pay the fees." Olivia tried to explain, "I'm not his family member. I'm just..." The nurse looked at her impatiently. With a sigh, Olivia stopped explaining. She decided to help the man out to the end. "All right. I'll pay up right now." Chapter 349. The sudden appearance of the man messed up her plans. She couldn't leave him alone. Then, the emergency room's doctor verified that the man's life wasn't at risk and that he would regain consciousness soon. It was only then Olivia left the hospital in a hurry. The man regained consciousness and was told he was brought to the hospital by a kind person. He wanted to thank the person right away. Unfortunately, the lady left after she paid for your bills. How long has it been since she left? She just left. The man jumped out of bed and chased after Olivia. He ignored the nurse shouting behind him, "You can't leave yet. You still need to be checked." He didn't listen to the nurse and quickened his steps. He saw a slender figure by the road. Olivia got into a cab before he could call out to her. She rode the cab to the cemetery and bought some of her grandmother's favorite flowers when she passed the flower shop. She went to her grandmother's grave first. She set the flowers down and talked for a bit. She would never step foot near Leia's grave if something like that hadn't happened. The sky had cleared up. There were fallen leaves and branches everywhere, proof of last night's storm. Upon arriving at Leia's grave, Olivia stared at her picture. She had a different feeling from the last time she came. She had thought Leia was unfortunate for dying at such a young age. Crouching down, Olivia covered the face on the picture, leaving only the eyes visible. She was sure the eyes looked exactly like those she saw on the woman who wanted to kill her. But this was just her guess. There was only one way to get real evidence. She looked at the grave behind the gravestone. She needed to open up the coffin for some bones. She wondered if Ethan would allow her to dig up the body of his beloved sister. Olivia was unsure. When she looked closer, she realized that something was wrong. The cement around the grave had been dug up. The dirt above the grave was hastily filled up and was a mess. She wondered if the damage from the last time the grave was destroyed wasn't completely fixed yet. But that couldn't be. The gravestone was different from the one she saw last time. It was a new one. If the gravestone was replaced, there was no reason Ethan, who loved his sister, wouldn't fix the rest of the grave. There was only one possibility. The grave was recently destroyed and hadn't been fixed yet. It was either that Ethan hadn't noticed yet, or he didn't have a chance to fix it because of the storm. Olivia went back to the urban area. She wanted to talk with Ethan. At the Miller residence, Kelvin was shocked to see Olivia appear on the doorstep. They already knew that Olivia's bone marrow wasn't a match. Toxic hive had evacuated, and they wouldn't able to hurt Olivia. They didn't expect Olivia to come to the Miller residence. They wondered if Olivia had noticed something. "Hi, Mrs. Miller." Kevin wasn't good at hiding his emotions. Olivia said, "You don't look pleased to see me." "Not at all. I'm just surprised. You finally came to see Mr. Miller. Come on in. Mr. Miller hasn't been resting well. He even got a fever last night. He'll definitely listen to you if you talk to him." Olivia didn't think too much about it. She quickly followed Kelvin into the yard. The trees in the yard had already grown new leaves. Gone were the desolate scenery of winter. Olivia withdrew her gaze and went into the villa. She felt different emotions every time she visited the Miller residence. At the moment, she didn't care about Ethan's fever. All she wanted was to do a DNA test on the body in Leia's grave. Kelvin brought her to the door before stopping. "Mr. Miller is resting inside. You can head inside, Mrs. Miller." After Kelvin left, Olivia raised her hand to knock. She paused for a second. She felt a little sad that they had grown so distant. She remembered that Ethan was resting, so she didn't knock. She twisted the doorknob lightly and went in. Chapter 350. The room was quite dark. In order to let him sleep peacefully, the blackout curtains were tightly drawn. Olivia gently opened a small gap to allow a faint light into the room. She walked cautiously toward the bedside. If it were in the past, Ethan would probably have woken up due to his usual vigilance. But now, his eyes were tightly closed, and an empty IV bag was next to him. Olivia reached out and felt his forehead. It was burning hot. The fever hadn't subsided yet. Ethan's physical condition had always been excellent. He rarely got sick like this. It seemed like she would have to wait till later to talk to him about Leia. She was about to withdraw her hand, but her wrist was grabbed. Ethan pulled hard, and she fell into his arms. She wanted to push him away with a frown, but she heard him say hoarsely, "Don't leave." Sighing, she remained still. She stayed in his embrace. Ethan was happy, and his arms tightened around her. The scorching heat from his body enveloped Olivia from all sides. It made her feel uncomfortable. They hadn't been in such an intimate position for a long time. Even if he was her ex-lover, it made her feel uneasy. "You need to loosen your grip. I can hardly breathe," Olivia softly protested. Ethan wasn't fully conscious. He didn't hear what she said and tightened his embrace further. He murmured, "Liv, I was wrong. I really am sorry. Please don't leave me." Olivia had never seen Ethan this way, not even when they were together. Ethan was an arrogant man. He would never admit that he was wrong. But he was like a helpless little boy now, muttering words like, "I was wrong," and, "Don't leave me." Olivia wanted to say something but suddenly felt his fingers creeping into her clothes. "What are you doing?" Ethan rolled over on top of her. He was wearing green pajamas. A few buttons were loose, revealing large parts of his skin. Olivia could see the injury on his chest. It was more severe than she had imagined. The wound had healed, but it left a sprawling scar on his chest. She swallowed the words she had planned to yell and touched the scar. She was sure he would have killed himself if she hadn't cut herself loose. She wanted to say he was rotten to the core. But when she jumped off the building, he followed without hesitation. He was willing to trade his life for hers when she was kidnapped. But he wasn't exactly good either. All the pain Olivia had suffered so far was inflicted by him. Olivia didn't even know how to describe the relationship between them. Her cool fingers touched the scar, causing Ethan's body to heat up even more. "Does it hurt?" Ethan said in an upset tone. It hurts, but it hurts more when I think about you. Olivia looked him in the eye and saw that the corners of his eyes were red. His skin was pale, so the flush stood out more. She noticed the messy hair covering his forehead. Some strands were curled up. He no longer looked like the domineering man who always looked at her condescendingly. He was like a kid who had been bullied. Olivia had only seen him like this once, the time when he was drunk. He rarely displayed such innocence. She couldn't stand seeing him like this, so she looked away. Get off of me, I have something to tell you. I don't want to. Ethan was like a rebellious kid. He had an obstinate expression on his face. He reached out and grabbed her chin to turn her face toward him. Before Olivia could react, he already kissing her domineeringly.